we'll do. All right. Get my screen shared, and we will go from there. Abby, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So we'll try this again. So as I mentioned before, my name is Deborah Corrales. I am a senior analyst over here at Meditech over PCS, BMB, critical care, and long-term care. I have Abby as my backup. So if you do have any questions, please feel free to use the chat or the Q&A feature, and we will use that to answer any questions that come up. So today we're going to be going over assessment building, and we'll be talking about the building blocks within assessments. I am dealing with a bit of a cold, so I'm very sorry if I sound a little funny, but we will manage. So the first dictionary we're going to take a look at today is the group response dictionary. So we're going to find that in clinical, dictionaries, documents, and then group response. So this dictionary is used to define group responses. So these are groups of valid responses that get added to a query. And then we assign these in the query dictionary. So I'm going to pull up my abdomen description. So we have our mnemonic active name. So our name is the description for that specific group response. We have the maximum element length. So this is the maximum number of characters that are allowed for the group response mnemonic within this group. So that we'll see that when we go over the elements tab. And then we have the menu procedure allowable to edit. So if you only want certain users to be able to edit this specific group response in the dictionary, you would add their menu procedure access. If you leave it blank, anyone can edit it if they have access to it. Over on the Elements tab is where we're building that specific group response. So we have our element mnemonic, our element name, our rank, our value, and the normal. So the element mnemonic is the mnemonic that is unique to the element. You can't have the same mnemonic for multiple elements. They are individual. The name is the name description of this element or individual responses. And these are the eligible responses for that specific query that we're looking at. The rank, so we can use this field to apply a sequence to the responses. So as of right now, they'll sort alphanumerical based on the element mnemonic, but if we wanted to change that order, we can use the rank to do so. The value, so this is the value that's associated to that specific response. So this comes into play if you're using rules, like a calculate rule. We see this with the fall risk assessment, the skin risk assessment, things like that. The normal is not something that is used for PCS, but it is a yes or no. The element long name, so this is specific to the one I'm highlighted on. So you can see I did flat there and added some extra dots. And I can add long names to each specific one if I need to. So if I don't have enough room here in the element name, I can do the element long name. So I'm actually going to get rid of those. And then we have the descriptor text. So this applies per element. So if I go over to flat, you'll see I don't see that one anymore. The last two fields down here are not for use with PCS, so we're not going to be going over those today. Once I have created my group response, I then would save that and go into my query dictionary. So in the query dictionary, we have multiple different types. So this will happen to be a group type because that's the one we're looking at. But we have our mnemonic active, our text. So our text is the name of the query, the question we're asking. We can also have a long name. So we can enter here a full name of the query. And there is a 200 character limit, and that overrides the text field. The description, so this is a where I can add maybe some more details about this query, so how it's used, but this does not display to the end user. So this is just for internal only. So type, we have multiple different types depending on what we're looking to do. So we have blood pressure, so we use that for our blood pressure queries. Comment, date, group, label, length, money, number, optional pointer. With a pointer query, this allows us to look to a specific dictionary. We also have quantity, result, temperature, text, time, view, weight, and yes, no. So depending on what we select, gives us different options. So this one is actually group response multiple. So the multiple field is set to yes. I cannot change this because that is against our post-live editing guidelines. Once something is defined as a multiple yes or multiple no, we're not able to change it just because it can cause corruption. Some of the entry options will have new entries. So this is specific to our pointer type queries only. So it's looking to dictionary, but if I have new entries set to yes, then I'll be able to free text in something that's not in the dictionary. Account query. So this is if you want the query response to be shared throughout all of the modules within the system on that patient-specific visit. So there's really no harm in setting this to yes, because you want to make sure that it communicates through everything. If I set that to yes, then I also have the demo recall type set able to be set. So this is to save responses to this query to the demo recall files for the patient. So this means that it ends up becoming available for, when it's set to patient, any visits in the future for the patient. So we would do this with our history queries, things like that. You wouldn't necessarily do it with maybe your vital signs because those may change from visit to visit. Group response. So this looks up to the group response dictionary, and this allows me, so this is that last group response that we looked at, and it allows me to pull that in there. Our next field is the display name. So this is for group or optional type queries only. So this is if you want the element code of the group response to display, as well as the element name. And this is actually specific to a CDS, so it's not specific to PCS documentation. Name only, so this refers to when you're in any of the NPR applications if you only want to see the element name displaying. So it wouldn't come into effect in PCS. The length, so this is the available characters for the specific query, and it only applies to specific queries, so you might not have length for all of your queries. NPR length is the length that will be used when you're looking in any of the NPR applications. Decimal precision, so this is going to be on quantity type queries only. So this is going to be the number of decimal places you want to include in your responses when you're using a quantity type query. NPR units, so this is for length, weight, type, and temperature type queries. So this determines the units that are used when you're in the NPR application. Justification, so options here are left, right, center. So this is when we're looking anywhere where it would be view only. If it is a yes/no query, we can also add a comment. So this is whether or not we want on my yes/no query. Yes, because we don't want to look at a yes/no. Allow yes/no comment. So if I wanted a comment to also display there. If I did have this set to yes, I would have my comment length, so how long I want that comment. Cancel out of that one and go back to our, let's look at an intake query. Intake, so the options here are intake or output. So is the specific query going to be measuring intake or output? So setting this field will allow the response to count towards any total intakes or total outputs on the I&O panel. So it's really important to keep track of if what you're setting to intake or output, that it's truly an intake or an output. Additionally, if you have our critical care module in 6.15 or 6.16, you're going to have this new field of cumulative totals. You only get this if you purchase critical care. And the cumulative totals, so create a new one. So my options here are include, exclude, or undecided. So this is how the system is going to handle the cumulative totals for the specific query for critical care. So if you want the system to save and display the cumulative totals, you would actually set it to include. And if you don't want it to display, you would set it to exclude. So for example, pulse rate would be a number query, but I don't want to track cumulatives for that, so I'd set it to exclude. And then I have undecided or blank. So if I set it to undecided, the cumulative totals for the query are not going to display on the critical care flow sheet, but it will save internally. So if I then decide that I want to change it to include, all of the information will be there for me. Next is select. So this is for any NPR CDSs, so does not impact PCS. The XML tag, this is for regulatory assessments only, and this is the XML tag that will be used for the XML file for the MDS assessment. Valid for nomenclature mapping. So if we set this to yes, it's going to unlock the nomenclature tab and allows me to map any IMO data. Other vendor value set map. So this is going to be used, it allows you to filter the available queries when you're looking in the query map dictionary within MIS. Patient resuscitation status. So is this query used for a resuscitation status? And it's in regards to the resuscitation status enhancement. Down here we have the menu procedure access allowable to edit, same as we do on the group response dictionary. So if we leave it blank, everyone has access to it. And the next one is the translate screens, yes or no. So if I'm making any edits to the dictionary, do I want that to translate throughout the system? Yes or no. If you're making changes and you're not ready to roll them out, you might want to set it to no. But if you've made some changes and you're ready for everyone to see those and work with those, I would set it to yes. So we're going to look up is a pointer? No. We're going to create a new pointer just so I can show you the pointer tab. So over on the pointer tab, my product line, so I can look to MAT and NPR or just NPR. I'm going to do MAT. So my MAT object, so if I do an F9 lookup here, it gives me all the objects that I can look up to. But I know I want to look at the person dictionary. So I would do MIS person and the field. So I want to look for by mnemonic. And then I actually want it to display the name, and then I can also filter it a little bit more. So this just allows us to, if I'm documenting information, it allows me to look up to the person dictionary rather than having to manually type out the specific, maybe the physician that I'm looking for. So I'm going to back out of that one, and I'm going to look at my blood pressure to go over to the parameters tab. So we have descriptor text. So similarly to the descriptor text we saw in the group response dictionary, this is descriptor text that's specific to the query. We also have the units. So these are the units that are specific to the query within MAT documentation. And then down here we have our normal and then our graph ranges. So we can do from age, so the starting age, and then also sex. And we can define what a normal low is and a normal high, and then where I want that to graph. We also have these new limit low and limit high fields, and these are only applies when documenting in PCS, EDM, or SIR, and if a user enters in a value that's lower than the low, they'll be prompted with a warning, and if it's higher than the high, they will also be prompted with a warning. And we have details on that enhancement during our enhancements WebEx.
Deb, we do have a question. If you could provide an example for valid for nomenclature use and a real example.
So this is specific. I don't. We happen to have this one. So this is specific to IMO mapping. So this vital sign, this blood pressure query, it's mapped to this specific number within for IMO. I don't want to get rid of that setting. Does that answer the question? It's specific to IMO mapping. Okay. I'll go back to my GI abdomen description to talk about mapping. So on the mapping tab, so this is where we use to map kind of alternative data sources. So it was originally coded for regulatory, but we realized that it has some benefits within normal PCS documentation. So the example we have set up here, I have it set up to seed. The type is recall or seed. When it's set up to recall, I do have to manually recall on the flow sheet, but if it's set to seed, it works like auto recall. So I have my location of default with my method of query. And it's what I'm doing is I'm looking to this other abdomen query. And what I'm telling the system is if this abdomen query here is documented as soft, I want soft to default into my abdomen description query. If no tenderness is documented in this query, I want non-tender to default into my query. So it just allows us to be able to share information without having to go back and maybe look to see what was previously documented on another query. We do recommend obviously one query theory, but in some cases maybe you do have multiple queries for something. This one is a specific to a PCM query, and that's why it's out there, and we've mapped it here. Are there any other questions about the query dictionary before I move on?
There is a question, which versions have limit lows, only critical care module or 6.1?
It is 6.1. I'm not sure of the specific numbers off the top of my head, but I know it is in 6.1. And it's not specific to critical care.
Okay, they were also asking if it's in 6.08.
I don't believe it is, but I don't remember off the top of my head.
Okay.
But I believe it's specific to 6.1.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions about the query dictionary before I move on?
That is all I see coming in the chat right now, but I'll let you know.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to move on to the query group dictionary. So it is very recently that PCS can use query groups. So this is a way to put multiple queries, group multiple queries together. Let me make sure I'm looking at the right one. There we go. So it kind of helps to organize queries. So for example, you can have a respiratory history group that contains all of the queries that are respiratory history, such as asthma, bronchitis, pneumonia, and any other similar queries. So that's what we have. My format here is group. So the option is yes, no, and that allows me to pull in yes, no queries or group response like we have for this one. If we go over to the default tab, you'll see that this is where I'm assigning the group responses or the individual responses. for the specific group. So these are the responses that I'm using. I can look up to a group response dictionary, and that's what I've done here. The next field, I can change what the column header is and the specific label. I have my group responses by column header. And what this is going to do is allows me to group query responses that share the same column header together. And then display text once for common responses. So this is if I only want the header to display once. And then down here are all of the queries that I'm going to be using. So for this specific respiratory example, these are all of the queries, and then up here are all of my responses. Over on the application tab, I can change it up by application if I need to. Otherwise, it's going to use everything from the default tab. And then I can also do some overriding based on by query. So if here I did PCM and I wanted to, let's say, exclude those, and then I can go over to by query, and for this query I want to include it in PCM, and then I also just allows me to kind of make changes on the fly from there. Not going to save any of my changes so I don't mess up anyone else's documentation. Okay, and the next dictionary that PCS uses with assessment building is the instance type dictionary. So we create instance types and attach them to a documentation section that is going to be considered a repeatable. So for example, we use this with wound locations because there might be multiple wounds on a patient, so we want to make sure we So here I have my mnemonic active name, and then I have allow ad-lib responses. So this is to allow users to free text any instances. So if maybe any of the options I have down here don't meet what they need to say, I can have it set to yes, and they're allowed to free text. So this also allows them to, when they're editing, to enter in the free text instance or save it, and users can rename and make any changes to that. And whether or not they have access to rename any ad-lib instances is based on their PCS access. Next, we have our special type. So special type, we have blood product automatic, IV automatic, and IV meds automatic. The last option here is something that is currently being worked on. So it's not something you will see just yet. So we have the blood product automatic. So this is specific to TAR. So when I am building my TAR screen for my intake, I need to use an instance type, and I need to make sure that the special type is set to blood product automatic. IV meds automatic and IV meds manual is for documenting our IV intakes. So with the infusion titration enhancement, we do use the IV meds automatic. Down here we have our group responses. So this actually allows me to pull in group responses from the group response dictionary to build this instance. And if I go over to the preview, it shows me what it's going to look like when I'm documenting. I'm going to close that. And I can sort it by rank, mnemonic, or name. So it's looking into the group response dictionary to either sort it by the element mnemonic, the element name, or the element rank. Are there any questions about the instance type before I jump into the documentation section dictionary?
Don't see any in the chat right now.
All right. All right, so let's pull up, we'll look at the GI. So over on the main tab, the first thing we have is our long name. So this is a free text that allows me to override the name when we're looking at it on the assessment. So it's always important to keep in mind that any of the long names that we looked at today are specific to PCS. You're not going to see any query long names or group response long names when you're looking at a CDS. They're specific to PCS. We have our status. So the status options are final or draft. So draft means all edits are allowed, including the removal of question sets and queries, but you can't use draft in live. So if it's set to final, it means that I can't delete a question set and I can't delete a query, but any other edit will be allowed. Use for PCS, we're going to always set it to assessments. And that also controls different buttons that we have up here as well. My recall options are manual, automatic, or disabled. So manual means that I have to click the recall footer button. Automatic means that everything will pull in automatically. And disabled means I will not be able to recall at all. And then start expanded is yes or no whether or not my assessment starts as expanded. And then the rest of the fields down here are specific to PCM. All right. Moving on to our question sets tab. So this is where we build the documentation section. This is where everything that I'm seeing when I document really comes from. So the first thing I have is my label. So this is the specific label for this question set. Whether or not is active or not is set here. So if it's something that is no longer being used, I could set this to active no. Yes. Repeat yes or no. So if this is set to yes, like we do have on this vowel sound right here, I need to enter in an instance type. And then start expanded refers to the individual question set. So if I also want the question set to start expanded, I would need to set it to yes. And then we also have our recall mode. So we have batch and individual. So when it's set to batch, it looks for the last date and time of everything that's all together. So it looks to all the responses within the question set. When it's set to individual, it's going to pull the last response for each specific query. And then protocol, this allows me to define protocol for this specific question set. And it's always important to keep in mind that the protocol is specific to when it's on the work list. If I have a protocol set at my label, it's actually not going to display on the MAR.
Deb, we do have a question back on the main tab.
Okay.
It says we have use for discharge tab. What is it for in 608? Use for discharge is blank under main header tab.
So the documentation section dictionary, we are in a 6.1 ring right now. I believe that when it's set to use for discharge, that is specific to PCM using the discharge document. So that's not something would be, used in PCS. Okay. Next, we have our flow sheet type. This is specific to critical care. So if you have the critical care module, you are able to define this. And this is whether or not I want to maybe change the label when it's on critical care if I want the label to display or suppress. And then down here is where I build the query, the bulk of it itself. So we have the option of query, image, cumulative. This is going to be specific to any sites that have critical care. Group, this allows me to pull in query groups. Capture, is going to be also specific for critical care using our waveform capture functionality. And then also the family history tool, which is currently in development, is there for family history. So if I select query here and I do a lookup here, it's going to look to the query dictionary, allows me to pull in queries. I have my active yes or no. So if this query is no longer needing to be used, I've created a new one, I can set it to active no here, and that allows it so this query doesn't no longer displays for future documentation. And then we can also define an override label. So if I want the label to override, I want to maybe add a longer name here, I can do that here. Bold, yes or no. It's also important to keep in mind that if you're setting bold to yes, you also need to define the facilities you want it to show as bold. If you leave the facilities blank, it won't show in bold. Response format. So this field will be active for only certain types of queries. So let me see if I have any that allow me. Look at the preview. Aha. So it's going to default to columns. So on my first vowel sounds, you'll see that one is set to yes. And this is what it's doing is it's putting the items in columns here rather than the wrap lines. And then suppress, circle, alt slash. So if I have a group response multiple, I can have this all button. So that allows me to, rather than clicking individually, I can just select all here. But if I want, I can suppress that by setting this field to yes. Down here, I have some descriptor text. So this is the descriptor text for the question set. So it's specific to the question set, not the query. And then my descriptor text orientation. When I have an instance type, my only option is top. But if I have one that is not, it allows me to put it on top or on the left. So let's add one. We're going to put this one on the left, and then I'm going to put some over here. Top. Only option being top. And then if we go and look at the preview, you can see I have my descriptor text over here, and that's what I did on the left. And then with the instance, it shows right here up top.
Deb, there's a question. Why would we assign a protocol to a label if it isn't shown to end users?
So it's shown on the work list. So if you add the protocol to the label, to the question set, it will show on the work list. I just mentioned that it will not show on the MAR. There is a proposal out there for that. Great. So I'm going to jump onto the rules tab and just outline some of the stuff that we have over here. So this allows me to assign rules to my documentation section. My rule types are going to be suppressed, which allows me to stop the query from displaying altogether. So suppress rules can only be based on outside factors. They cannot be based on queries because the suppress rule does evaluate as soon as I open up the assessment to document. So patient location, provider type, day of the week even, user, things like that. Things that exist already before I open it up. Skip allows me to gray out the query. So this can be used based on query responses. Next, we have calculate. So this allows me to calculate responses, like I mentioned, where we would use this on skin risk assessments, fall risk, things like that. Allows me to require a specific query. And then we have message that allows me to pop up a message. We also have jump rules. So this allows me to go to a different description, and we'll take a look at this one once I'll jump onto a patient and show you how this works. It allows me, if we answer a specific response, to automatically bring the cursor to another section. So it allows me to kind of get through the assessment quicker. We also have cosign abilities within the documentation section. So here, associated to the gastro symptoms query, if I document it as vomiting, I am required to enter a cosigner. And then over here on the preview tab just gives me an idea of what it looks like. And I do have the mode button here, which allows me to change it between flow sheet and questionnaire. Are there any questions about the documentation section before I go into the intervention dictionary?
No questions in the chat.
All right. So we're going to the intervention dictionary, so clinical dictionaries, patient care, intervention. Intervention. All right, and so we have our mnemonic active name, nomenclature map. So if I need to map this intervention to for any IMO mapping, I can do that here as well. MAR display, if it is a reassessment that's used on the MAR, I can add that in as well. If it's left blank, it's going to use the first 3 letters of the intervention name. Down here we have valid for, so this is what applications I can use it in. So EDM, emergency department. IND refers to indirect interventions, so this is anything that is not related to patient care, like clean crash cart, check crash cart, stock, closet, things like that, things that are not directly related to a patient. PCS allows me to use it in PCS. We also have SIR, MAR, so if it's going to be used for a reassessment or assessment. CCFS refers to critical care. RGL refers to regulatory, and ONC refers to our oncology application. Down here, so this is going to be used for orderable interventions. So if the intervention is going to be orderable, I would set it up down here. Once we get through all the fields, I'll go into another one that's already set up for ordering and show you what those fields look like. All right, so I'm going to jump on. Are there any questions?
Yes. Do you have separate printed materials explaining how to use / coordinate the different fields for requiring or enabled for nomenclature map?
I believe there might be something out there. I know there's nothing on any of the PCS pages, but we can take a look. I can take a look, and there might be something on the MIS pages or any of the PCM pages, but I know there's nothing specific out there for PCS, but there might be something on the project and resource page for PCM. All right. Over on the detail tab, so we have our facility. So this is what facilities this intervention is going to be used in. So I can add an additional facility. I don't actually want to do that, so I'm going to cancel it so I don't forget. If it's no longer active in that facility, I can set that to no. So first field we have here is the header. So I can define a header from the header dictionary. Protocol, so this looks up to the PCS protocol dictionary. So this is if I want to attach a protocol to the entire intervention. Confidential, this is whether or not this specific intervention is confidential. If I leave it blank, it is no. I can define a specific frequency, so I can look up to what's already built in the dictionary, or I can free text something in. I'll look into that, but I can add a frequency there. Whether or not the frequency is editable, that's yes or no. If this query is going to be, if this intervention is going to be used for monitor capture, I would need to set this field to yes. And then we have some monitor capture fields here as well. This is the default interval that's going to be used for monitor capture. Whether or not the values are editable, so after they've been captured, can I edit those? Allow manual documentation, so this is whether or not I'm able to manually document on this intervention on the work list. And then when I have it set to monitor yes, I also get a monitor field down here that allows me to add a monitor dictionary entry. Autocomplete, so this allows me to automatically complete an intervention, and my options are never or blank. After initial documentation, so you might want to use this on your mission assessment. So after you document your mission assessment, you don't need to do that again. So document it once, complete it. Ask once, so after I document it once, it's going to say, hey, do you want to complete this? If I say no, it won't complete it and it will not ask me again. But if I do ask on every new every time I document that intervention, I'm going to get a pop-up that says, hey, do you want to complete this? And I can complete it from there if I need to. Require e-sign. So the options here are yes or no. So this is whether or not I am going to be required to e-sign after I file my documentation. Next we have suppress from patient care. So this is if I want to suppress this specific intervention from displaying on the patient care panel, yes or no. Evidence link, so this allows me to associate an evidence link. This one we have set up to go to Google, but if there was a specific, maybe any intervention, for an evidence-based support system, whether it's Zincs or any homegrown system, it allows you to put that on there so you can launch directly from it from the work list. If this intervention is related to a performance measure, you can set it to yes, so you get the performance measure icon. If it's related to a key measure, I can set it to yes to get the key icon on the work list as well. The text is going to be the intervention text associated with the intervention, and this is what populates the I. Default frequencies, site down here. So this allows me to associate any MIS sites to the specific intervention. And then also down here, I have associated data. So this populates the A on the work list, and I can associate a lab, and then it looks up to my EMR items, and I can select my specific one. I can also do an individual query if I need to. And then I can also do a report. So once again, it looks up to my EMR items, and I select the specific one that I want to display. Over here on the side, we have our default frequencies, so I can associate additional frequencies to this intervention, and this comes into play when I'm looking at orderable interventions, and it shows my default number there. But if I had my frequency field filled out, it would just use that frequency. Ability to document care provider type. So this looks up to the care provider type dictionary, and it allows me to say that only certain, so maybe my registered nurse, my nurse practitioners, and my student nurses are able to document it. So only the users with those provider types can document on this intervention. And maybe I only want it so my nurses can change the status of it, but my student nurses cannot. So my student nurses, unable to change status to, are not able to change the status of the intervention to active, to cancel, complete, discharge, hold, inactive, or suppressed.
Deb, there's a question. Is the evidence link included in the final medical record or just a reference for nurses, such as could the evidence link go to best practice for a particular nursing skill?
So this is specific to displaying on the work list, so it allows them to launch that while they're on the work list. And I'll show you how that looks once we get into the chart. So if you have a best practice, a homegrown best practice on your intranet, you can put that evidence link in there, then allows them to click on the evidence link to launch it. Are there any other questions?
Not that I see right now.
Okay. So I'm going to move on to the documenting tab. So this is where we associate the documentation section. So right here, I have, it looks up to the documentation section. Dictionary, I'm allowed to add multiple documentation sections. And then I can also add, when I'm highlighted, I can add a result notice. So if there's a query on this documentation section that triggers a result notice, I can add that specific result notice here. My default documentation style, so this is either flowsheet or questionnaire. So this allows me to override what I have set for my default documentation style within PCS, within my user preferences or my access. And then if I have an intervention event notice, I can add it, and this looks to my PCS event type, and I can add that here. And I can say whether I want it to trigger for initial documentation, documentation edit, all documentation, status complete, or discharge. And then down here we have this require field. And what the require field is actually going to do is it's going to prevent users from removing this intervention from a patient's care plan, critical path, problem, or standard of care. So if this is set to yes, they will not be, and this specific intervention is associated to one of those items, a care plan, a critical path, a problem, or a standard of care, they're not able to delete that intervention. If it's a standalone intervention that I added to the work list by clicking add, I can still delete it. But if it's part of a care plan or one of those things, I cannot. Over on the locations tab, I can do pretty much all of the same things I did between the detail and the documenting tab, but I can do it by location. So if I looked up to my PCS seminar location, I can define a different documentation section for that location. All right, and I'm going to go into
Deb, oh,
Mhm.
sorry. A question on the chat
ahead.
is, do you have an example of the result notice?
I can see if there is one out there. Let me see. Signs. There should be one on here. So should be set up here. So on this specific documentation section, I have my temperature query, and this result notice is built. Notices. Which one did I do? Triggers. So if I document a temperature greater than 105, it'll trigger this. But in order for it to know to trigger it, I have to add it to my intervention associated to the documentation section. So that's what a result notice would be off of a query response. Typically, we see this with temperature and any of the vital signs.
Thank you.
Okay. Yep. So I wanted to jump back into the intervention dictionary to look at the order management fields. So the categories here are dependent how I have my OM dictionary set up. So typically we see this set to routine care or nursing or what have you. My order description is going to default based on my name, and then my order type is going to be care or oxygen. When it's set to care, it is just a care intervention, ADL assessment, vital signs, any intervention that I would order. So if I go to care and then I go to my ordering tab, edit text, this is whether or not I can edit the text that's here as when it's associated to an intervention. And then I can also add a CDS here as well to my intervention. And then I can set up aliases so that when I'm searching an OM, it's a little bit easier. I'm going to look at my oxygen. So I have my care order, my order type here of oxygen. So you'll notice when we go over to our ordering tab, it does look a little different. So I have an alias of O2 here, and then my delivery methods. So all my possible delivery methods, and it allows me to define what I want my default flow rate to be. So if I were to then go and place this order these are going to be the 3 options I see there. And we'll take a look at that because we're going to go ahead and jump in the chart right now just to kind of see some of the things I just talked about. So I'm going to go ahead and place that oxygen delivery assessment so you can see what I meant by that. I am not an ordering provider, so I do need to select one. Let's see, oxygen delivery assessment, and you'll see those 3 options are showing right there for me. So that's what I meant by when we were looking at that. Okay, we're going to go back to the work list, and let me sort alphabetically, gastrointestinal assessment. So here I have the R for my reference links. If I click on that, so we had Google set up for that one, so it launches me right into Google. So if you have anything, local intranet that you wanted to make sure that they have access to quickly, I can do that. You can do that from there for your users. And then I also have the icon for my performance measure and my key measure. They're not clickable because there's no information behind them. It's just a visual indicator that it's out there. Does anyone have any questions about assessment building?
No questions in the chat right now.
Okay, well, that is our webinar on assessment building. We are having a webinar tomorrow on post-live editing guidelines, so if that's something you're interested in, I would definitely recommend coming and sitting in. That one is scheduled to start at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Hopefully I won't have as many technical difficulties as I did today, but we'll roll with that as we go. I'll wait a few more minutes to see if anyone has any questions that come up before we just disconnect. So give everyone a couple minutes. Any questions?
No additional questions, just a request if we find nomenclature materials to email them.
Yep, Abby, did you take down their name?
Yes.
Okay, yeah,
Right
we will. All right, awesome. I will be sure to look around for that and reach out to some additional specialists if I can't find something so we can make sure we get that out to you.
Okay, and just a bunch of thank yous.
Oh, well, thank you. And I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day, and I hope to you connect tomorrow when we talk about post-live editing guidelines. Thanks, everyone.